Hello. So I have a wrap up here. This is the last 2 weeks because last week we were on vacation. A really shitty vlog will appear at some point. But yeah, I have a handful of books here for 2 weeks. It's really not a great amount. But again, we were on vacation and I read less on vacation. So, first up, I did read the first volume of the Avant-Gardes. This is a comic series. It was kind of came out in the wake of stuff like Giant Days and Lumberjanes and stuff like that. So we got a lot of diverse women doing stuff, and they're probably all queer in some way. It's about a basketball team that gets formed at a art college, which is kind of an interesting concept. It was cute enough, and the characters were definitely distinct. That was yeah, the art style's cute enough. This is what we're looking like here. It's not really my thing. I'm probably not ever going to pick up the second volume. I think it only ever got 2 volumes. But yeah, no, the characters were fine. It was fine, but it's not my thing. I gave it, I believe, 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read a choose your own adventure book, and that is Indiana Jones and the Eye of the Fates by Richard Wenk. So this is you are like a young boy whose father works with Indiana Jones, and you end up going to find this mysterious eye of the Fates. And I actually did not die, which is impressive considering every single time I do a Goosebumps one of these, or even a like the traditional choose your own adventure, I'll put up pictures here, I die terribly, very quickly. But this one I didn't. I got the good ending. I don't know if you can die in this one. I'm not gonna lie. But because I didn't, and because I didn't die, I'm unsure if it's possible. So it's possible that you can't die in this one. But I didn't, which was very exciting. 4 out of 5. All right, next a reread of my favorite book of 2022. And after rereading it, I'm like, well, shit, this is my favorite book of all time. So I reread this book because last year, this author also wrote my favorite book of the year. It's like, which one do I like better? And it's this one. And so that's Glamorama by Bret Easton Ellis. Holy shit. So the first time I read this book, for about 60 pages, I was deeply bored. I was like, Jesus Christ, this is just like dull and repetitive. And then I started to get really into it and I really enjoyed it. This time around, there was never any boring moments because I was already in love with Victor. I was already in love with all that shit. But I started to really, I think, understand it, which was really nice because I think the first time I read this book, I loved it. This time I understood it a little bit more, and I would love to reread it again in 2 years and understand it even more. So basically, this book is about a model. He's a male model, aspiring actor, Victor Ward, and he is vaguely present almost in the Rules of Attraction. I haven't read the Rules of Attraction because like a character's like disappeared boyfriend who's like off in Europe. And Victor Ward is stupid. He's very dumb. He's dumb as a box of rocks. He's so fucking dumb. But there is, you can see that a lot of it is really something that he put on himself that then started to become true. Because that's really that's something that Ellis thinks about a lot in his novels is what is actually reality and what's not reality. And that's very, very present in Glamorama, where reality kind of seems to shift based on how deeply somebody believes something. And Victor, he ends up in this novel, he is opening up a club for a guy whose girlfriend he's sleeping with, and obviously this all goes to shit, and he gets shipped off to Europe, where he ends up becoming a part of this group of vigilante models who like blow shit up and destroy things. And if that sounds like Zoolander, that's because there's a lot of controversy about that. And that people think that Zoolander really kind of ripped off Glamorama, which never got a movie. I'm not sure how a movie would work. And there's a lot to think about in this thing about like unreality and what is actually happening here, because about 90 pages into the book, Victor starts kind of thinking about seeing this like film crew, and he's like, he's in a movie, this is all a movie. And I'm of the school of thought that I think that's really more of a metaphor. And you kind of see that because the movie kind of breaks down near the end. And I do think, I mean, obviously the real villain of this, and this is kind of spoilers, but it's really more my interpretation. The real villain is Victor's father. Victor's father is a United States senator. And it is, by the end of the book, he is making a bid for the presidency. And his son, Victor, is a unreliable at best party boy. He throughout the entire beginning, He is trying to convince Victor to go back to school, to go to law school. Victor did graduate with a bachelor's degree, and you do see through his massive musical knowledge that he does have the capacity for intelligence, but he just doesn't really care to. That's not what his character is like. And I mean that in the most kind of fourth wall breakage way possible. That's not what his character is. That's not who he is in this script. Because I think Victor almost thinks of himself as a character. That is that sort of thing. And I could talk about Glamorama forever. I could write a fucking thesis on this book. This is my favorite, as of right now, this is my favorite book of all time. All right. And no, I still haven't read American Psycho, but Patrick Bateman is mentioned in this book. Now next year I'm going to reread The Shards, and it's going to like bump up, and then it's going to be that one. But I do think it's Glamorama, just based on character work alone. I just love Victor. Anyway, next I read a sequel to a book I read, I believe, last year. I really liked the first book. This one, not so much. That is Court of Wanderers by Rin Chupeco. First up, the cover is hideous. This cover is not, it's not pretty. It's not good. So this is the sequel to Silver Under Nightfall, which is a kind of vampire horror fantasy situation. We're seeing a lot more of that recently, between that and like Empire of the Vampire, which I also read and really enjoyed. I'm really digging it. But basically the book follows this kind of vampire hunter, Remy, who ends up getting sexually and emotionally involved with a vampire couple. And really the main strength of the first book was the relationship that Remy had with those two. And in this book, that takes a backseat to the plot. And the plot was never the most interesting thing about these books. The most interesting thing about these books was the tension between Remy and Malik and what's her name? Xiaodin. That was the really interesting part, was their tension and all that sort of stuff. And this one, like, they're already an established couple. And also they're not having near as much sex. Like, they're just not. And so it's less interesting in that way, because the character work is phenomenal. I love the relationship building. I love the tension, but the plot was so heavy in this book, and I just didn't care as much, because I just didn't really care about the plot. I cared about the characters. I cared about the relationship. I cared about the tension. I would not be upset if Chupeco decided to write more books in this world. I think that I think that they kind of left a possibility there with like Lorien and the kid whose name we never learned, which is mildly hilarious. But no, I like the first book more, but it was not an unsatisfying conclusion. It just wasn't really what I liked in the series. I gave it 4 out of 5. This was mostly a week of like pretty good books, but not like super great. All right, next. I read a short story anthology, a horror anthology. I'm gonna say not as good as Book of the Dead. Museum of Horrors, which is edited by Dennis Etchison. And the weird thing about this book, okay, so we've got on the front here, we've got our 4 most famous authors in this book. We've got Peter Straub, Stephen King's bestie, kind of, very Stephen Kingy. Joyce Carol Oates, borders on literary. Richard fucking Lehman, for some reason. Richard Lehman, our 80s splatterpunk guy, is in here. And then Ramsey Campbell, who wrote one of the most boring books I've ever read. And that kind of sets the tone. These stories were more grief-filled. They were more tragedies. The only true like horror story I'd say is Lehman's. Lehman's story was real fucked up, and I loved it a lot, and all the other stories were vaguely boring. 3 out of 5 stars. Also, wait, one more thing. Peter Straub's story wasn't even finished, which makes me upset. I don't mind Peter Straub. A Special Place was really, really interesting. Ghost Story was fine. I've read a chunk of Peter Straub. He's not a bad author, but his story was not finished in that book, and it was even like mentioned in like a note, like, by the way, this story wasn't finished, but I just threw it in here. I'm like, fucking why? Why did you throw it in there if it wasn't finished? All right, next, this is the one book I read on vacation. And this is The Diablo's Curse by Gabe Cole-Novoa. I read Beyond the Red back before this author transitioned, when he was still Ava J. And I didn't like sci-fi at the time, but I was also, I want to say, 18 years old, and I was very, very easy to please. So I gave it 3.5 stars. If I reread that book today, I'd probably give it more like 1 or 2 stars. This book is more up my alley when it comes to genre. This is about curses. It's kind of historical. It does have a vaguely hilarious plot point where one of the characters just keeps dying over and over again. It's kind of funny. Basically, this story follows basically a demon who is trying to become human, because when they were a baby, their mother, before they were born, their mother, who thought that she could not have children, promised the soul of her firstborn to this devil. And so then of course she could have a baby, and that baby ended up being our main character, Demi. And this and Demi is trying to become fully human. And to do that, they have to cancel all the deals that they made. And one of the deals that they made was with this kid whose family is cursed. And the curse is that they die really fast, but this kid made a deal so he can't die, so he dies and then he just wakes up a couple hours later. It's hilarious. I just don't think Novoa's writing is for me. I just don't. It's not the best. I don't know. It's not my thing. This had an interesting concept. I liked the island. There was an island section that was really cool. Overall 3.5 out of 5, which is the same rating I gave Beyond the Red. But I do think that if I reread Beyond the Red now, it would be lower. All right, the last book I read, Little Town on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is not one that I read when I was a kid. I read the early ones. I read probably up through The Banks of Plum Creek or Shores of Silver Lake. I don't know which one comes first. But by the time I was Laura's age in this book, by the time I was 14, 15, I was mostly just reading Stephen King. And so I have a really present childhood memories of especially Little House in the Big Woods, and some of the other like early ones. But this one, I don't think I ever read. And these books, it is a shame they have not aged very well, because there is a scene where Pod is blackface in this one, because they are really well done, and I think that they are a really interesting look at Midwestern pioneer life, because they're very detailed. They're very, very detailed, and I think they're very, very well written, but then also Pod is blackface. So 3.75 out of 5 stars. I'm currently reading one of the Brandon Sanderson secret projects. I'm reading the Frugal Wizard's Guidebook to Medieval England. I'll put up a picture because I don't feel like getting up and getting it. It's fun so far. It's interesting. I'm really upset that I like Brandon Sanderson as much as I do. I'm not gonna lie. So these are the books I read in the past 2 weeks. That's all for today. I'll talk to you later, and goodbye.